The headlines broke like a thunderclap across social media. California Governor Gavin Newsom has officially filed a misconduct complaint against Karoline Leavitt, citing reckless disinformation and targeted harassment. Within hours, hashtags like Joe Leavitt lies and Newsom strikes back trended across X and Instagram, but Karoline wasn't silent for long. In fact, her response would make Gavin regret ever putting his name on that report. The tension began just 48 hours earlier during a fiery segment on a primetime political debate show. Karoline, seated across from a smug-looking Newsom, had cornered him live on air, demanding answers about California's skyrocketing homelessness, mass business exodus, and the now infamous Reparations Task Force scandal. "You govern like California is your playground," she said sharply, "but it's turned into a cautionary tale. Why should America trust you?" Newsom had tried to stay composed, offering rehearsed talking points, but Karoline wouldn't let up. Her tone sharpened, cutting through his deflections. "You don't want transparency, Governor. You want applause." The live audience gasped as Gavin, visibly shaken, fumbled his response. The clip went viral overnight, racking up over 9 million views in 24 hours. That's when the complaint landed. It wasn't just a press release, it was a calculated move. Newsom's team framed Karoline as a danger to civil discourse, claiming she was part of a coordinated right-wing campaign to undermine Democratic leadership through media intimidation. But Karoline didn't blink. The next morning, she stood before the press at a small podium outside her media office in D.C., eyes fierce, voice clear. "Let me be absolutely clear," she said. "Gavin Newsom filed a complaint because I asked him tough questions he couldn't answer. If holding failed leaders accountable is now considered misconduct, then buckle up because I'm just getting started." The media erupted. Conservative pundits praised her fire. Liberal analysts warned she was playing a dangerous game. But it didn't matter. Karoline had turned the tables. Behind the scenes, her team gathered footage, records, and eyewitness reports tied to Newsom's controversies. And what they found would shake up more than just the California governor's ego. Karoline's next move would be bold and public, and Gavin wouldn't see it coming. By the time Gavin Newsom's communications team had begun damage control, Karoline Leavitt had already made her next move. At 9 a.m. sharp, her verified account on X, formerly Twitter, posted a cryptic message. "You tried to silence me with a complaint. Here's my response. Check her Newsom files on 10 a.m. EST. The countdown began. Commentators speculated wildly. Was it a bluff? A publicity stunt? A last-minute political stunt gone too far? Then 10 o'clock hit. Karoline's media team dropped a digital file repository titled The Newsom Files, a streamlined, sourced, and devastating dossier covering 3 major scandals tied to Newsom's administration. 1. The Phantom Housing Project, a $2.6 billion initiative meant to combat homelessness that reportedly funneled money into shell organizations with no measurable results. Karoline's team had obtained internal emails showing Newsom aides flagging inconsistencies and optics issues months before audits began. 2. COVID power play. Memos from the pandemic era showing Newsom's office coordinating selective enforcement of lockdown restrictions, targeting religious institutions while allowing Hollywood shoots to continue, even providing exemptions for donor-linked businesses. 3. The private jet fund. Flight logs and donor records indicating that Newsom had used private jets for unofficial travel, some trips overlapping with fundraising events that weren't properly reported, and she wasn't done. Karoline posted a video, just under 2 minutes, sitting at her desk, calm and composed. "Governor Newsom tried to brand me as dangerous. Why? Because I asked him what Californians are asking every day. He didn't file a complaint because I lied. He filed it because I told the truth, and I had the receipts to back it up." The internet melted down. Hashtags flipped. Karoline exposed truth began trending across platforms. Even typically neutral outlets like Reuters and AP reported on the document dump with headlines like, Karoline Leavitt responds to complaint with damaging allegations against Newsom. Within hours, Newsom's press secretary issued a dry, lawyer-crafted statement. These claims are politically motivated and selectively framed to misrepresent a complex policy record. But Karoline wasn't playing defense. She was on the attack. She went live again that evening on a conservative news channel, calling out the governor by name. Gavin wants to play victim, but he governs like a king. If accountability threatens him, maybe he's not fit for public service. That clip? Over 15 million views in 24 hours. Newsom's allies scrambled to shift the narrative, but the ground was already moving beneath them. Karoline had reshaped the story entirely, from being the accused to the accuser. The hearing she had hinted at, it was now inevitable. And Gavin would soon face questions not from journalists, but from Congress. The House Committee on Oversight hadn't expected to take up a case involving the governor of California, until Karoline Leavitt made it impossible to ignore. 2 days after the release of the number Newsom Files, Committee Chair Representative Jordan filed a formal notice of inquiry, citing compelling evidence of financial mismanagement and misuse of federal funds by California's executive leadership. It wasn't just political theater anymore. This was about real accountability. Karoline was invited to testify. Her name appeared next to policy analysts, state whistleblowers, and even a former Newsom aide who had quietly contacted Karoline's office after seeing her stand firm. The press called it a political spectacle, but those inside the loop knew Karoline was bringing receipts to the federal level. Behind the scenes, Gavin Newsom's team was in panic mode. Legal counsel advised him not to attend the hearing voluntarily. Rumors swirled that he might fly to Europe on an economic mission just to avoid the cameras. But optics mattered, and his absence could be worse than facing Karoline head-on. In the days leading up to the hearing, Karoline sharpened her case. She rehearsed every fact, date, and quote. She wasn't coming to play political games. She was coming to expose a pattern of hypocrisy, mismanagement, and media manipulation. She also made sure to remind the public why this mattered. At a town hall streamed live from Manchester, she stood before a full crowd and said, "This isn't about a blue state versus a red state. It's about truth versus power. If leaders like Gavin Newsom are untouchable, then the rest of us are unrepresented." I didn't run from his complaint. I responded. Now let's see if he has the backbone to do the same. Clips from that town hall racked up millions of views. Even independents and moderate Democrats began paying attention. Not because they agreed with everything Karoline said, but because she was doing something rare, fighting back with facts instead of fear. And while legacy media outlets tried to paint the showdown as a stunt, public polling showed a different story. A national survey released the day before the hearing found that 61% of likely voters agreed Newsom should testify under oath. Even more shocking, nearly 40% of Californians said they'd vote for Karoline if she ran in their state. Gavin could feel the walls closing in. The day of the hearing was set. The committee room would be packed. The country would be watching, and Karoline, she wasn't nervous. She was ready. The hearing room was overflowing, not just with reporters and cameras, but with tension so thick you could feel it hum beneath the lights. The oversized American flag hung behind the committee dais, and every seat in the gallery was filled. This wasn't a typical policy discussion. This was political combat. Karoline Leavitt sat calmly at the witness table, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, her signature cross necklace barely visible beneath the collar. Her notes were minimal. She didn't need a script. Her confidence came not from rehearsed lines, but from knowing the facts were on her side. Gavin Newsom, on the other hand, wasn't present. Instead, his legal proxy sat 3 seats away, flanked by aides with stacks of carefully curated documents, and a visibly nervous press handler pacing in the back. The excuse? Scheduling conflicts. But everyone knew the truth. He didn't want to be in the same room as the woman who had dismantled him in front of the country. The chair gavelled the room to order. This committee has convened to review claims of federal fund mismanagement, suppression of political speech, and retaliatory use of public office by Governor Gavin Newsom, as presented by Ms. Karoline Leavitt. Ms. Leavitt, you have the floor. She stood. I'm not here to play games. I'm here because a sitting governor tried to destroy my reputation with a baseless complaint, and in doing so exposed a pattern of abuse that goes far beyond me. She held up a printed copy of the Newsom files and continued. This document isn't speculation. It's sourced, verified. It contains whistleblower testimony, internal memos, and financial records that show a consistent misuse of power under the guise of progressivism. As she spoke, cameras zoomed in. Screens across America lit up. Live streams carried her every word into homes, classrooms, office break rooms. She turned to the Newsom legal representative. Governor Newsom accused me of misinformation, but what I exposed wasn't fiction. It was fact. What he calls harassment, I call transparency. What he calls disinformation, the public calls proof. Gasps, murmurs, and even a few nods from across the aisle rippled through the room. Then came the kicker. If the truth makes powerful men uncomfortable, then maybe they were never fit for power in the first place. The chairman didn't even try to hide his smirk. Karoline's testimony lasted 12 minutes. Every second was electric. The committee asked follow-up questions, and she answered without hesitation, quoting line items, referencing direct sources, citing case numbers, no filler, no spin. By the end of the session, members from both parties were pulling out their phones, not to fact-check, but to follow the woman who had just shaken the system without raising her voice. And somewhere, watching from a carefully crafted studio backdrop, Gavin Newsom knew he had started a fight that was no longer his to control. Within hours of the congressional hearing ending, clips of Karoline's testimony saturated every major platform. Cable news couldn't ignore it. Even networks typically dismissive of her politics aired segments titled "Karoline Leavitt Takes Center Stage," and Newsom's no-show sparks outrage. But the real firestorm erupted online. Influencers across the political spectrum weighed in, some mocking Gavin's absence, others stunned by Karoline's mastery of facts and calm demeanor. Hashtags like "Where is Gavin?", "Karoline owned the room," and "Leave it unfiltered" dominated X and TikTok for days. But behind the viral momentum, the real consequences were just beginning. The Oversight Committee announced an emergency follow-up session. This time, Governor Gavin Newsom would be subpoenaed to appear in person. The vote passed with bipartisan support, a rare show of unity in a fractured chamber. As one moderate Democrat from the Midwest told the press, "You don't get to file public complaints and then duck accountability. If the facts are wrong, you show up and correct them. If they're right, you owe the country an explanation." Gavin's team went into high alert. Internal emails from the governor's office leaked to the press showed furious back and forths. "Who let her get this far ahead of us?" one message read. Others debated whether to send Gavin into the lion's den or continue to deflect and redirect. Karoline, meanwhile, doubled down. She launched a 3-part docuseries on her social channels titled The Cost of Silence, each episode breaking down a different Newsom scandal from the dossier. Professionally edited, backed with evidence, and narrated by Karoline herself, the series reached millions within the first 72 hours. And it wasn't just the public watching. State-level watchdog groups in California opened independent investigations into several programs tied to Newsom's administration. One local reporter tweeted, "Karoline Leavitt may have just done what California Republicans couldn't in 20 years. put real pressure on Gavin Newsom. Back in D.C., Karoline sat for an interview on a major Sunday morning political show. When asked if she had any regrets about taking on someone with Newsom's influence, she didn't flinch. Regret? I regret that it took this long. Leaders aren't supposed to be comfortable. They're supposed to be accountable. The clip? It went viral before the interview even ended. And Gavin? He was boxed in. His media allies couldn't spin the facts anymore. His absence looked weak. His complaint, once meant to silence a critic, had now elevated her into a national figure. The follow-up hearing was scheduled for the next week. And this time, Gavin Newsom would have to face Karoline Leavitt, not on a stage he controlled, but under oath. The hearing room looked the same. Same committee, same cameras, same tension, but the stakes were higher. This time, Gavin Newsom was in the room. He entered from the side door, flanked by legal advisors and aides, eyes locked forward, jaw tense. The usual swagger was gone. His carefully groomed image couldn't hide the exhaustion in his eyes. This wasn't a campaign stop or a friendly media interview. This was real. And directly across from him sat Karoline Leavitt, steady, composed, and unshaken. When the chairman gavelled in the session, the silence was deafening. Governor Newsom, this committee has issued a subpoena requesting your testimony regarding allegations of misuse federal funds and political retaliation. You are under oath. Gavin's voice was calm at first. He delivered pre-written remarks full of legal jargon and political ambiguity, emphasizing misunderstandings, partisan framing, and the complexity of large-scale governance. But the committee wasn't here for spin. Then came Karoline. She was granted 5 minutes to directly question the governor, and she used every second like a scalpel. Governor, were you or were you not aware that the housing initiative you personally championed had multiple unresolved financial discrepancies flagged internally before public reporting began? Gavin stumbled. The state auditor, yes or no? He tried to pivot, but the damage was done. Karoline had him cornered, not with opinion, but with facts he couldn't dismiss. She moved to the private jet records. Did you reimburse the state for the private flights used to attend fundraising events with your top donors in Napa Valley? Gavin blinked, then admitted, no. Those flights were arranged through a nonprofit entity. A nonprofit funded by corporations with active state contracts. So the people of California didn't pay directly, but influence was traded all the same. The room stirred. Karoline wasn't shouting. She didn't need to. Her tone was surgical, her command of the data undeniable. Gavin looked increasingly agitated, occasionally glancing at his counsel, whose only advice was whispered, "Don't react." But it was too late. The live stream once again exploded. And this time, even liberal commentators couldn't ignore the optics. Karoline had asked the questions journalists had ignored. She had done the homework, and she was doing it all under oath with the man who tried to silence her seated just feet away. The final exchange stunned even the committee. Karoline, Governor, you filed a complaint against me claiming I endangered civil discourse. But what truly endangers civil discourse is leadership that fears questions more than corruption. Would you agree? Gavin stayed silent. His mic was on, but his voice wasn't. The chair leaned in. Governor, that was a question. Still nothing. It wasn't an answer. It was a defeat. The hearing adjourned shortly after, but by then, the moment had gone viral. Millions watched Gavin Newsom sit frozen, while Karoline Leavitt dismantled the narrative he tried to build. The war wasn't over. But the tide had turned. Permanently. The clip of Gavin Newsom's silence, sitting motionless as Karoline Leavitt stared him down across the congressional chamber, hit 25 million views in 48 hours. That one moment told a complete story. No editing, no sound bites. Just one politician with nothing to say and another refusing to back down. Karoline's media team moved quickly. They released a statement titled, "No one is above accountability," reiterating her commitment to transparency and daring the mainstream press to cover the full hearing, not just cherry-picked sound bites. Within hours, alternative media outlets picked it up. Podcasts, independent news shows, and even skeptical centrists began giving Karoline credit for something that had grown rare in Washington: courage. Meanwhile, Gavin's team scrambled. California Democrats closed ranks, but privately, the tension was obvious. Donor confidence was shaken. Pollsters reported an 11-point drop in Newsom's favorability nationwide. Even in California, over 40% of voters said they believed he evaded responsibility. Back in D.C., Karoline didn't take a victory lap. Instead, she doubled down. She began holding town halls in purple districts, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, not campaigning but asking questions. "Do you think powerful people should answer to you?" she asked. "Or do you think you're supposed to stay quiet while they hide behind titles?" The response was thunderous. Packed gyms, standing ovations. Independents started wearing "Ask Better Questions" shirts, her unofficial slogan. A week later, she appeared on 60 Minutes. It wasn't a softball interview, but Karoline didn't need softballs. She was calm, even when pressed. And when asked if she had presidential ambitions, she laughed. "I have accountability ambitions. If that leads somewhere else, the voters will decide." Even her critics admitted she was no longer just a talking head. She had become a national force. Meanwhile, Gavin canceled 2 high-profile appearances. His communications team claimed family obligations. But insiders knew the truth. He had become a liability to his own party. His silence, once framed as composure, was now seen as cowardice. One late-night host summed it up with brutal simplicity. Karoline Leavitt asked real questions backed by real documents, and Gavin Newsom blinked on national television. Say what you want about her politics, but in that room, she won. The narrative had shifted, not just in Washington, across the country, and Karoline, she wasn't finished yet. By the second week, it was no longer just a political skirmish. It was a national reckoning. Gavin Newsom's attempt to silence Karoline Leavitt had unintentionally elevated her to a household name. She was no longer just a firebrand. She had become a case study in what happens when power is challenged by persistence. But the consequences went beyond the two of them. Across the country, voters and local reporters began digging into their own governor's records. One conservative think tank launched a Leavitt Index, a project grading state leaders on transparency and misuse of federal funds. In schools, debate teams were reenacting the hearing as a real-time case of political accountability. And in Sacramento, whistleblowers began coming forward. 2 former staffers from Newsom's housing initiative contacted Karoline's office anonymously, confirming what her documents had suggested all along. Funds had been rerouted, reporting requirements were dodged, and public statements were scripted to mislead. The Oversight Committee now had direct testimony to add to its evidence pile. Meanwhile, Gavin's allies tried to discredit her, but nothing stuck. They called her a media opportunist. But Karoline kept showing up with facts. They said she was too young to be taken seriously. But then she spoke at Harvard's Kennedy School and left the room in stunned silence. Every criticism only added fuel to her message. They don't fear me because I'm wrong. They fear me because I won't stop asking why they are. And it wasn't just rhetoric anymore. Karoline's influence began shaping policy. Several state legislators, even some Democrats, introduced bills modeled after her proposals for transparency audits and limits on executive use of federal discretionary funds. Her town hall appearances were turning into bipartisan events. She wasn't running for anything, but people were starting to ask when she would. As for Gavin, he was now under formal investigation by both the Oversight Committee and California's own state auditor. The story had gone full circle. What started as a petty complaint had transformed into a full-scale political liability. And yet, Karoline remained focused. At her next press briefing, a reporter asked what she thought about Newsom's sinking poll numbers. She smiled slightly and said, "This was never about him. It was about what he represents. Unchecked power. He just happened to be the one who picked a fight with the wrong woman." The room erupted in cameras and flashes. No one clapped, but no one doubted her anymore either. By week 3, what began as a clash between Karoline Leavitt and Gavin Newsom had become something bigger than either of them. It had become a movement. It wasn't organized by a party or built on billion-dollar donors. It was born online, fed by frustration, and carried forward by voters who felt ignored. Voters who saw in Karoline someone who didn't just talk about accountability, but forced it. Across the country, town hall meetings started opening with a familiar phrase. If Karoline could take on Gavin Newsom and win, why can't we hold our own leaders accountable? Her inbox was flooded. Not from lobbyists, but from teachers, truck drivers, nurses, and small business owners. They didn't just thank her, they sent photos of potholes left unfilled, budgets left unchecked, policies never explained. And she read everyone. That's when she launched a new initiative called Ask Them Why, a national digital tool allowing citizens to file FOIA requests, track state spending, and publish unanswered questions for the public to see. It wasn't red or blue, it was just real. Transparency, she said in her launch video, shouldn't depend on political convenience. It should be the standard. You pay for this government, you have the right to know what it's doing. It exploded. Even some progressive voices praised it. A popular left-leaning podcaster tweeted, "I don't agree with Karoline Leavitt on policy, but on this, she's absolutely right." Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom was stuck. His team tried to launch counter-initiatives, hold press events, even post glossy reels on social media, but everything was drowned out by one truth. He had tried to silence a voice, and instead amplified it beyond his control. Worse still, new polls showed Karoline with higher name recognition than several sitting senators. She wasn't even holding office, yet she had captured the moment and the public knew it. A senior White House advisor was overheard telling a journalist, "We underestimated her. Big mistake." At her next national interview, the host leaned in and asked the inevitable, "You've gained more influence in a month than some politicians do in a decade. Where does it end?" Karoline smiled faintly and replied, "With the truth. That's the only place it ever should have started." She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to grandstand, she just kept showing up. And now, so was the country. 3 months after Gavin Newsom filed that initial ethics complaint, the congressional hearing chamber once again filled to capacity. But this time, Karoline Leavitt wasn't seated at the witness table. She was on the dais, as a special guest advisor, invited by the Oversight Committee to present closing remarks on the series of findings from the investigation she had helped spark. Newsom had already issued a formal statement acknowledging procedural irregularities and a need for better transparency protocols. He stopped short of admitting wrongdoing, but the political cost had already been paid. His national ambitions were effectively on ice. His image, once pristine among elite donors and media allies, had been cracked beyond repair. Karoline took the microphone with composure. She wore no victory smirk, gave no triumphant tone. Instead, she delivered a message that echoed far beyond the walls of that room. When this began, I wasn't the one with power. I didn't hold office. I didn't have a platform bigger than the people who tried to silence me. But I had something stronger. The truth. And I believed Americans still cared about it. She paused, scanning the room. This wasn't about one governor or one complaint. It was about the dangerous idea that criticism is an offense and that questions are acts of aggression. That must end, not just here, but in every statehouse, newsroom, and courtroom in this country, a rare bipartisan round of applause followed. Even members who had criticized her privately couldn't deny it anymore. Karoline had changed the game. After the hearing, she stepped into the hallway, mobbed by reporters, not for scandal, but for insight. Her answers were short, grounded, and always redirected to the citizens watching from home. That night, she posted one final video to close the chapter. Shot simply from her home office. With no teleprompter, she looked directly into the camera. If you're waiting for someone else to ask the hard questions, stop waiting. You're the one they're hoping stays silent. The moment you speak, they start scrambling. Because the truth doesn't need permission, it just needs a voice. The post was captioned only, "We're not done." And just like that, Karoline Leavitt walked off the national stage, not as a victim, not even as a hero, but as a citizen who proved that truth spoken clearly can shake even the highest walls of power. In a time when political power often hides behind polished speeches and filtered headlines, one voice stood up and asked what no one else dared. Why? Karoline Leavitt didn't just defend herself, she challenged a system. And in doing so, she reminded America that truth doesn't need permission, just persistence. This wasn't just a moment. It was a message, loud, clear, and unstoppable.